And it's not because it has a largely Marxist administration, as it now does, a communist administration, but because it has a constitution, and a very strong and robust constitution, which stands in the way of anyone trying to impose world government or any other such tyranny over the people of the United States. And the people of the United States are just not going to have that. And so what I think is going to happen is this. Those who are trying to push through this global government nonsense and this alarmism about the climate are going to try to bring forward the Mexico conference that should be taking place just before Christmas 2010, a year from now. They're going to try and bring that forward about 6 months, because they know that by this time in 2010 there will have been midterm elections in the United States. And the Democrats, who are now riding high, they have control of the White House and both houses of Congress, which is a very rare thing for the Democrats to have. They're certainly going to lose the House of Representatives, where every one of the 435 seats is up for re-election, and they're going to lose the Senate as well, I think, because 1/3 of the Senate seats are up for election, though I think they may still have a bare majority there. They certainly won't be able to get the 60 votes they need to stop a filibuster. They can get that now, as they've just demonstrated yesterday on the healthcare bill, but they won't be able to get that after the midterm elections. And so once the midterm elections have happened, now that the Republicans have quite rightly made it increasingly plain that they are not going to go along with any of this climate nonsense, and they are going to repeal any bill that gives effect to any treaty that overrides the U.S. Constitution. They're going to repeal any bill such as the Waxman-Markey or Boxer-Kerry climate bills the moment they do take office again. Once that is widely understood, then that will be the end of the climate scare. And therefore, I think the extreme left who are driving this at the UN and elsewhere are going to try to bring forward the Mexico conference so that they can still use the majorities that Obama has in both houses of Congress while there's a chance, because they know that after the midterm elections he has made himself so spectacularly unpopular with his electors that the Democrats will never command such majorities in either house again. And once the Republicans are in control, that will be the end of any radical left-wing legislation to try to shut down large sectors of the U.S. economy. It isn't going to happen.
So, in a prior interview, you talked a bit about how the money that was going to be collected from this agreement, and they did set up the framework, that's my understanding, for the money to be funneled into the IMF. Can you explain a bit how that money would be distributed to the poorer countries and how that
yes, that's
puts
a very
them
good question.
at a disadvantage?
First of all, it's nothing like as much money as it was going to be. They were going to impose a 2% tax on all Western countries, 2% of GDP, which would have been an enormous, it would have been thousands of billions of dollars. That's been stopped. They were also going to impose a 2% tax on every financial transaction into or out of any Western country. That would have been an even larger amount of money. They were also going to impose a tax on all uses of carbon via a cap and tax regime, which was going to be made worldwide. That now is not going to happen either. But they have set up what's called the Copenhagen Green Fund. And it's wicked the way they use this word green as though it meant something, whereas in fact it's a code word for Marxist, really. The Copenhagen Green Fund, which is going to be the repository of money from Western countries, which you've just said, will it be paid to poorer countries? No. Very, very nearly all of this green fund will in fact go towards propping up what will gradually become, by slow accretion, now that they can't do it all in one go, a world government. That's the alternative game plan. If they can't bring forward the conference that's due in Mexico this time next year to the middle of the year so as to keep Obama's advantage, what they'll do instead is they will try to grow this business by stealth. They've got 3 new bureaucracies set up under the Copenhagen Accord, one of which is the Green Fund, one of which is a financial panel to regulate the Green Fund, and that's where the IMF, not entirely clear, may or may not come into it. And then there's also a third technology panel, which will be effectively its job will be to steal patent and intellectual property rights from Western countries in areas of new technology to do with energy generation and give those patent rights away to third world countries, which simply means that anyone who now wants to develop an invention will not do it in any of the major Western countries. They'll go to a country not covered by this ghastly technology panel and do it there. I myself have several patents to my name. I'm going to have to move them, and otherwise they will be effectively confiscated by a sort of socialist grab, which this technology panel is all about. So what they have done is, of course, extravagant, it's expensive, it's unnecessary, but it's a lot less bad than what they might have done. And what I think we have to do now is to contain it, to try to bring to an end this climate fund and all the other nonsense and say, no, actually there's no cause for this, and taxpayers are just not going to go on funding it, particularly at a time when there is very severe economic trauma still to be sorted out. The United States is borrowing money at a terrifying and ultimately unsustainable rate. The United Kingdom still more so, and I think of all the countries of the West, the one most likely to go under completely as a result of flagrant over-borrowing by incompetent socialist administrations. I think it's going to be the UK. And I think that what will happen is that things will more or less jog along until the next general election, after which we would expect to have what would have once been a conservative government, but is now simply another form of socialism. Once the world markets realize that the Conservative Party in Britain is no longer conservative, and is simply another socialist party, which, among other things, believes in all this climate rubbish, then the markets will panic. They will stop lending money to the British government, and there will be what's called a gilt strike, and immediately the British government will be wholly unable to pay its pensioners or to pay the wages of its own people. And that, we're very, very close to that happening now. Whether they can avert it, I simply don't know, but it's looking very bad from the way I see the numbers at the moment. I think that if just one man in the Cayman Islands decides that he will no longer buy British government debt whenever they try to raise more money by selling it, then the rest of the world will follow this one man who's the biggest purchaser of debt of this kind in the world, government debt. And once he stops buying from our government, everybody else will too. So the fate of Britain is now in the hands, effectively, of one man. And it's entirely at his whim whether we continue to be solvent and paying our bills or not. So I think that in this climate, where even quite substantial Western countries are heading for the financial rocks at an appalling rate of knots, to talk of lavishly funding this Copenhagen Green Fund and this technology panel and this financial control panel and this new embryo world government that is what they're really trying to set up piecemeal now, I think those days are gone. We can't afford it. And the taxpayers are going to start saying, no, enough is enough. We've got to feed our own people first before we start handing money away to this new world government that, frankly, we don't need. So I think there's going to be considerable resistance from electors in those countries that are fortunate enough to be able to elect and unmake their governments, to allowing governments of any stripe to hand taxpayers' money away to the UN or to any other body associated with the UN for purposes of addressing the non-problem of climate change. I just don't think we can afford it, and I don't think we're going to be willing to pay.
I agree completely, and it seems that America is in the same situation, and it's been of my opinion that the whole carbon tax scheme has been a cover for the derivatives market that nobody wants to talk about. I have a question from the audience for you.
Yes.
It's from Spiral Mind 64. Does the failure of the Copenhagen Treaty force the Marxists into desperation mode, and what do you think their next move will be?
I think they're certainly very upset. That's no doubt. They had really hoped that they'd quietly captured one news medium after another. They'd put their people into key positions, even in right-wing newspapers in places like Britain. They'd spent years doing this, and they thought that Copenhagen would be the moment at which they could bring about this world government. And it has failed, and spectacularly failed, largely because people listening to programs like yours got in touch with their senators in huge numbers and said, no, we're not having this. So, where does this leave the Marxists or the world government wannabes or the UN, all these people who want to do away with democracy, do away with prosperity, do away with freedom, do away with the West as we know it today, and turn us all into miserable clones of Soviet Russia as it used to be? Well, I think these people are now realizing that the West is a tougher nut to crack than they thought. Yes, they could easily do this in Britain, where our constitution is not robust enough to withstand this kind of determined assault from within, but the United States Constitution has proven to be remarkably resistant